Well, welcome back to the Rice Report, everyone. We are rejoined here today by Gordon Chang, who is an absolute authority in the international affairs, China, the CCP, what's happening in Russia and Ukraine. Just a pleasure to have you back here, Gordon. How you doing?
Thank you so much, Eric. I really appreciate it.
Well, let's hop into it. We got a short period of time here today. Walk us through what's happening right now with Xi Jinping, with China, the CCP. What's happening in China right now? Lots of rumblings coming out of there.
There's so many things happening in China right now. Perhaps the most important is that Xi Jinping appears to be losing influence. I think that he has lost control of the Chinese military. He certainly has lost influence among senior officers. Among the Chinese civilian leaders, I think he's lost a little bit of altitude. Now, there's a lot of disagreement about all of this, and some people say that he is as strong as ever. But I don't think that that corresponds to what we're seeing because there appears to be signs of instability that are just inconsistent with the notion that Xi Jinping is still in control. Just to give you an example, General He Weidong, who is Xi Jinping's hatchet man, has not been seen in public since March 11th. Now, many people think that Xi Jinping sacked his own guy. I don't think that's the case. And the reason is that since July 9th of last year, in PLA Daily, which is the main propaganda organ of the Chinese military, they've been carrying articles that have been praising, quote unquote, collective leadership. That's a direct slap at Xi Jinping's one man style of rule. Those articles were written by people who were aligned with General Zhang, who is the number one uniformed officer in the Chinese military. Now, I think that that says that Xi Jinping is lost at least some support in the military. So there are things that we're just picking at straws in a sense, but it does appear he's in trouble. A number of independent sources have come to the conclusion that Xi Jinping is going to be tossed out of the leadership. I don't know if they're going to go that far, but the point is the Chinese leadership is in turmoil. When it's in turmoil, it means it cannot deal constructively with the rest of the world, which
Right.
means that any little incident, including the ones that we're seeing at Scarborough Shoal in the South China Sea, could blow up, and the Chinese leadership would not be able to diffuse and de escalate those crises, which means that any crisis could end up in region wide war in East Asia.
What are the greater implications if he's lost control of the military? What are the greater implications for us? And we'll get into Scarborough in a minute because I think that's a huge topic very few people are covering. But what are the implications if Xi Jinping has lost power with the military?
The military is the most important faction in the Communist Party. So it would be difficult to rule effectively if he doesn't have the loyalty of senior officers. So that means that I think that civilian leaders would understand that and would probably distance themselves from Xi Jinping. Now, there's a lot of turmoil. Xi Jinping is fighting back. He's not going to take his demotion without a lot of struggle. So I think it really says that right now, China's regime is not able to deal with either domestic or foreign problems. And we're starting to see this in the hints because the Chinese economy is obviously in trouble, but the Chinese leadership isn't doing very much about it. You'd expect that there would be more dramatic action. And the fact that there isn't, to me, says that there is too much infighting. Normally, the Chinese leadership acts by consensus. And when it doesn't have that consensus, it doesn't act. And that's what we're seeing right now.
So does this have anything to do with tariff negotiations, which continually get stalled? Could they be having a problem or an issue coming to consensus on agreement on tariffs?
I think that that's another sign of the leadership turmoil. Because you would think that China would be able to do a lot more, be a lot more effective in these discussions, but it
Oh,
hasn't
sure.
been. And it's a guess. As I said, we don't have confirmation on very much of what's going on, but we're seeing a lot of things in the same direction of the inability of the leadership to do anything. One of the most important things is the failure to put a lot of stimulus into the Chinese economy, which is what typically the party does
Yeah,
when
all the
there is a
time. Yeah.
downturn in the economy. But that hasn't happened. And that's a tell that there are problems in the regime itself.
Now, how does this? So Scarborough is an interesting topic. I believe it was a Chinese Navy ship was chasing a Filipino Navy ship and ran into another vessel in the water. What exactly happened in the Scarborough region?
Yeah, 2 Mondays ago, a Chinese destroyer and a Chinese Coast Guard cutter, and a Coast Guard cutter, these things are big ships, by the
Yeah,
way,
huge.
were chasing down a Philippine Coast Guard cutter. What happened is the Chinese destroyer got in front of the Chinese Coast Guard cutter, sheared off the bow. At least 4 Coast Guardsmen were dumped into the water. And what was really interesting was that the destroyer did not lend assistance. It was the intended victim, the Philippine ship, that came back to look for the sailors, which were not found. So it just shows you the nature of the Chinese regime. But the problem here for the rest of the world, for the Philippines and the United States, and for the rest of the world, is that China feels humiliated, and now it's been ramping up pressure on Scarborough. Scarborough is about 124 nautical miles from the main Philippine island of Luzon. It's strategic because it guards the mouths to Subic and Manila Bays. And China has been threatening to reclaim it. In other words, to pour a lot of cement and to turn it into a military base. This is obviously an act of aggression if it were to do that. And so this is where I think the United States needs to draw a red line. What is important is that right after the incident of a couple of Mondays ago, the U.S. Navy then did a freedom of navigation exercise by Scarborough, and then actually stationed 2 vessels there, a destroyer and a littoral combat ship, the Higgins and the Cincinnati, which is a deterrent sign. And a very good thing for the Trump administration to do. But this is not over yet because China is not going to let this continue in the way it is. They're going to do something pretty awful at Scarborough.
And that's why we would be stationed there. But so they're looking to take the Scarborough region as a military base strategically with the Philippines. Do you see conflict brewing between China and the Philippines? Would be a 15-minute war. I mean, this wouldn't last long, which would draw in further forces. Not Soviet Union, Russia, the United States. Like, do you see this being a launching point for something larger potentially?
Could very well be because we've got a mutual defense treaty with the Philippines. It's one of
Mm-hmm.
our oldest treaties, actually. So we have got to come to the aid of the Philippines. And the fact that we have had to basically feeble policies since 2012 has really opened the door for China at Scarborough and other places. A little bit of history is, I think, important here. In the early part of 2012, both Chinese and Philippine vessels crowded around Scarborough. The Obama administration negotiated a deal between Beijing and Manila for both sides to withdraw their craft. The Philippines complied, China did not. That left China in control of Scarborough. The feeling in the White House then was that they didn't want a confrontation. But what they did was, by not wanting a confrontation where China obviously dishonored its commitment, it essentially emboldened the worst elements in the Chinese political system by showing everybody else that aggression worked. And really, in short order after Scarborough, the Chinese then started to reclaim the 7 features in the Spratlys, which is the southern archipelago in the South China Sea. They ramped up pressure on Second Thomas Shoal, which is another Philippine feature in the South China Sea. And they then went hard after Japan in the East China Sea at the islands that the Japanese call the Senkakus and the Chinese call the Diaoyus. They both claim those 6 or 8 islets, but clearly the Chinese claim is virtually without merit. So really what happened is by not wanting a confrontation, the Obama administration just opened the door to more Chinese provocative acts in East Asia. And so at some point we got to close that door. And I think that now is the time to do that, because if we allow the Chinese to reclaim Scarborough, it will just show to the Chinese and the rest of the world that the U.S. is not good for its word. Its word is not good, and that treaties with the U.S. Are worthless.
So we have this brewing not only in Taiwan, it's now brewing in Scarborough, which bleeds into Philippines, and this is becoming a greater issue. So Obama, by not putting them in check for not honoring their agreement, has basically given them quasi authority to rule the region. Gordon, I think you're probably the only person talking about this out here, and this actually could be a trigger point to something much larger. I don't know how anyone could view it as, laissez-faire, hands off, let them do what they want, because we still have the issues in Taiwan. So how does that intertwine between those two regions?
Yeah, I worry about a lot of things, of course, but the one thing I don't worry about is China launching hostilities by invading the main island of Taiwan. And there are
Yeah,
a lot of reasons for that.
sure.
But that's not to say that Taiwan's safe, because if a war starts over Scarborough, over something else, Taiwan will eventually become involved. Because once war starts, because China cannot de escalate, this becomes region wide conflict, which means all of the countries in the region are involved, including, of course, Taiwan. So Taiwan gets involved in a war through the back door. The other thing that could happen, Eric, I mentioned that I don't worry about an invasion of the main island of Taiwan, but I do worry about the Chinese trying to pick off some of the outlying islands of Taiwan,
Yeah.
some of which are no more than like 2 3/4 miles from the main Chinese coast at Fujian, for instance. So Chinese could do something that, because that's easy. But invading the main island of Taiwan to start hostilities is something that Xi Jinping, I don't think, can authorize, because the military right now is in a mess. And also, Xi Jinping may not control it for the reasons I just talked about.
Would they be better off with or without Xi Jinping? So if he was losing military power, I forgot the gentleman's name, but are they better off with this military leader in charge or Xi Jinping in charge? Because first, I'll say it for you. It's almost impossible to get real information out of China. It is a full communist nation, full of propaganda. So I appreciate you sharing the information here. It's hard to tell, but who are they better off with a leadership?
Yeah, it's becoming more opaque. And the person you're referring to is General Zhang Shao.
There you go.
Zhang is the last name. Yuxia, given names. He's very powerful. And some people think that he actually is going to pick the next leader of China. And essentially, he's going to be running the show, if not in front, probably not in front, but from behind the scenes. So those are some of the unconfirmed rumors that General
Right.
Zhang is now the most powerful figure. But to answer your question, I think that China would be better off with somebody other than Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping has all of these ludicrous ideas about the way the Chinese economy should operate, and he's driven it into the ground. He is also a lightning rod because he's extremely aggressive, and he puts everybody ill at ease in the region and elsewhere. China would be very smart, and I don't want to give them advice, but they know this already.
Sure.
They would be
They
very
won't take it
smart
anyway.
to have. They won't take it anyway. They'd be very smart to have somebody who looks like a reformer, who would then we'd all say, look, we got to work with these reformist elements in Beijing, and so we would come to the rescue of the Chinese Communist Party, which we shouldn't do.
No,
So I think that
which
it's
we
in the
have done and
party's
we shouldn't do
interest.
again.
Absolutely shouldn't do again. I mean, George H.W. Bush is a villain in my book, because right after the Tiananmen
Agreed.
Square massacre, he did save Chinese communism. Bill Clinton saved Chinese communism in 1999 with his WTO, World Trade Organization agreement with China. And of course,
100%.
Richard Nixon in 1972. Because that was at the end of the Cultural Revolution. Mao Zedong was in trouble. I can understand what Nixon did, because this was the Cold War. Many thought we were losing. We needed an ally. And so people were looking for China to help us gang up on the Soviet Union. Now, we can argue about that forever.
Which
but the
is
point
ridiculous on
what
its face. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
What George H.W. Bush did and what Clinton did were clearly not in our interests. And so we should not come to the rescue of the Communist Party for a fourth time.
Yeah, I mean, the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, even you could argue that after the end of World War II, the only thing that spread was communism, right? I mean, Soviet Union grew in power, grew in numbers, grew in mass. So we've been bailing out communism for about 80 years now, and it's time that we end this process and let the Chinese do what the Chinese have to do.
Yeah, we had Yalta, which we had feeble Roosevelt basically ceded all of Eastern Europe to the Soviet Union. We've had some pretty awful diplomacy, and we shouldn't be repeating this again. We should be remembering Ronald Reagan. We need to call out the Communist Party as evil. It is evil. And we need a president of the United States to say it, just like Ronald Reagan called it the evil empire, told Gorbachev to tear down the wall, and was uncompromising. His philosophy, as he said famously, he said, my philosophy is we win, they lose. And that's absolutely the way that we've got to look at it. I know that's politically unpopular, but the point is,
not here.
When we try to accommodate communists, it never works out for us.
Yeah, they're parasitic. So as soon as you open up a wound, the parasite jumps in and it never leaves. And that's the issue that we have, is that we've been opening that doorway for far too long. I couldn't agree with you more. But I want to transfer into, we have a few minutes left here, into Russia, Ukraine. This what, Donald Trump said, I'll end the war in 24 hours. It's been 9 months, and no one can end the war in 24 hours. We know that that's campaigning. I'm not trying to hold him to hyperbole, which if you took it as serious, you were a fool. But this is a growing conflict. This is actually getting worse by the day. What do you see happening over there as well?
Well, we know that China is fueling this war.
Yes.
We know they don't want it to end. And this isn't speculation, because we have reporting from Hong Kong South China Morning Post that Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi on July 2nd had a conversation with Kaja Kallas, who is the EU foreign policy chief, in other words, his counterpart. And he actually admitted to her that China does not want Russia to lose, because if it did, then the United States could focus on China in East Asia. If you just extrapolate from Wang Yi's comments, it's clear that they don't want even Russia to win, because even in that case, we could focus on East Asia. So we have China, which is a combatant in this war, and we have to recognize that, is keeping this war going. And I think that as long as we do not break up that partnership, the war will continue. We can do this. President Trump has the leverage. He has the tools. Once he stops the flow of money to Putin, this war ends fairly shortly thereafter, because no money, no war. The money's coming in from India, China, Turkey, maybe a little bit from other places, but we need to use American power to stop those flows of cash to Moscow.
Yeah, it's always fascinating how one party who's not directly involved in a war wants it to continue for either financial purposes, which obviously they want the distraction. Wars are primarily distraction from something else. They're easy to draw attention to, but there's something else going on all the time. And China's involvement in this is not hyperbole at all. It's very well documented. Where do you see the conversations that Trump just had leading to, the conversations in Alaska? Do you think they went anywhere? Do you think they'll have any improvement on the war with Putin? Where do you see this at? Now, just giving my stance, I don't think we should be in this war at all. This is Ukraine and Russia. This has been going on for 750 years. You can trace this back for. This is their argument, not ours. But how do we de-escalate the violence in the region?
Yeah, well, Trump, Putin meeting in Anchorage, and then you have 3 days afterwards, you have the European leaders, you have the NATO Secretary General, the EU Commission President, all sitting in the Oval Office. So this is moving at Trump speed. I think, though, it starts, and I've had opinions all over the place about where this goes, but I think that Putin is going to slow this down, and it's going to slow it down because of China, because China is basically going to say to him, I can help you win this war. And so Putin is not going to negotiate. And, with these ferocious attacks that we have witnessed right after that Oval Office meeting, It's a real indication that Putin is looking for victory. He's not looking for a peace agreement. The one thing about Ukraine, I agree with you. This is Russia versus Ukraine, better part of a millennia. But the Chinese see this as where the future of the world gets written. And I mean, we can argue about whether that's right or not, but the way the Chinese view it, I think, is we've got to take that into account because we've got to change the Chinese mindset. Right now, we've done a lot of things to show China, Trump is generous. He has a very generous streak in him. The Chinese view it not as generosity, they view it as weakness.
Yes.
And so, really, what's happening is that China feels that they own Trump. Now, I'm not saying they're right. I'm not saying that Trump believes that he is owned by the Chinese, but what Trump thinks is irrelevant. What's important is what the Chinese think. And the reason why that's important is because that's what motivates them, that's what impels them to act. And it's making them more aggressive and more belligerent. And so Trump needs to show the Chinese that he is not owned by them, that he's the boss. The United States, the stronger country, is the one that is going to drive events, not China. Once he does that, the Chinese will slink into the corner and things will get better. But until he does that, this is going to be a very, very dangerous world.
Yes, I couldn't agree more with that. And the violence in that region pre and post Anchorage is on both sides. I mean, Ukraine launched a 570 drone attack into mainland Russia. So Zelensky doesn't want the war to end. That's obvious. He wants more money. He wants to continue to fight. Putin has China on the other side who doesn't want the war to end. The only people who want the war to end right now are the American people who are paying for it. And it seems to be like we need to have some sort of a real town hall conversation in this country to figure out whether or not we keep sticking our money and our feet in the fire because this is an ongoing situation.
Yeah, we can win this war without any expenditure, and that is just impose those tariffs on China. You remember we imposed 25% tariffs on India for purchasing Russian oil. We did that August 6th, but we didn't do it on China, which buys more Russian oil. So I think that we can end this war by not only putting those tariffs in place, increasing sanctions so that there's no money flows into Russia. This is no American weapons. This is no American troops. This is no American money. This is just enforcing sanctions and in some cases tightening them up. We do that, we win this war. And we create an enduring peace in Europe, which means I believe peace will spread around the world because once the Chinese see an assertion of American power, they are not going to take us on. If they don't think that we have will, they are going to make life really miserable for us. And they're going to start the world's next great conflict.
I completely agree with that. It's got to end. We need peace. We need peace. We need economics. We need prosperity throughout the world. And I think that we're going to see that in the next 4 years, but we're not going to see it in the next 4 minutes. There's a lot of complications behind this stuff. Everyone seems to know exactly what's happening. And I talk to people with much different views than yours, people with much different views than mine. None of us have an idea as to what's going on except world leaders who have information coming from advisors who may not have good information as well. So we'll see what happens with this. We'll see what happens. Yeah. So Gordon, please
just
go ahead.
One quick thing. World War I started because the situation was impossible for leaders to manage. We've got that situation right now. There are too many moving parts. And that's one of the things that makes this an extremely consequential moment.
I completely agree with that. World War II, same thing. Moving pieces, disinformation everywhere. One of the most fascinating eras in history. I'm going to cover that in an episode here in a couple of weeks. It'll probably be my last YouTube video when I do that. But Gordon, it's so good to have you on here again. Thank you so much for sharing this information with us. It's just so hard to figure this stuff out. And I'm so glad that we have people like you that are constantly looking into this, getting information from overseas and sharing it with us so we understand what's happening. So Gordon, how can everybody follow you? I know you got about 20 interviews today, but how can they follow you? How can they keep up with your information? Let everyone know so they can keep in touch with you.
Yeah. I talk about all this stuff on X at GORDONGCHANG, and I archive all my articles for free at www.GORDONCHANG.com.
Well, Gordon, thank you so much. Keep up the good work. Keep us informed. We'd love to have you on in a couple months again to keep us up to date as to what's happening. Hopefully, you won't have much to report. Hopefully, we'll get this all settled out, but that's not the reality of the world we live in. So, brother, thank you so much. I appreciate you being on here. God bless you. God bless this country. We'll see you next time on the Bryce Report. Have a good one, everybody.